Welcome to the Church Solutions Podcast, brought to you by JSL Solutions. The Church Solutions Podcast is designed to help equip you and your church in the use of technology and other tools and services. And now, here are your hosts, Steve Lacy and Phil Thompson.
And welcome, everyone, to another edition of the Church Solutions Podcast. My name is Phil Thompson.
And I'm Steve Lacy.
All right, we get that down. We've been doing this for years, and we've managed to get that in sync. So yes. Congratulations there, Steve. Steve, how are you today?
I'm doing great.
All right, good. I'm doing well, too. We're a tech company that helps churches and ministries primarily use technology and streaming video and mobile apps and things like that. So, and we talk a lot about different subjects related to ministry. So if this is one of your first times listening to us, we have a smorgasbord of things that we deal with. And today, we actually have a special guest, right, Steve?
We do. So Joe Way reached out to us last week, a couple of weeks ago, and he's written a book. So Phil, why don't you go ahead and introduce him?
Yeah, so Joe, actually, his real name, his real name, his legal name is Josiah Way. He goes by Joe Way, and he's the author of the book called Producing Worship, A Theology of Church Technical Arts. Producing Worship, a Theology of Church Technical Arts. He's the director of the multimedia services at California Baptist University there in Riverside. He also serves as the campus technical director at Saddleback Church. Now that's one of the campuses. What campus is that again, Joe?
The Aliso Viejo campus. Okay,
and so you're the technical director there. You got tons of experience when it comes to AV stuff, over 25 years working with AV productions, TV, film, recording, sports. That sounds fun. Theater, church tech, and you've even got some credentials, Joe. How good for you. You got a PhD in modern theology. What is modern theology? You've got a PhD in modern theology. What is modern theology?
I do. It's modern theology. They come up with as many monikers as they can on stuff, right? Just to fill out degrees. No, really, it's the study of how the church today uses the Bible, practically within its ministry, because obviously we're not going to use it in the same way as, it would have been done in, say, the first or second centuries.
All right, and that's from the University of Birmingham, UK. Did you go over to UK?
I went there a few times. I did most of the studies for it here in the States, but then I would go back for supervisions and to defend it, et cetera.
Yeah, good deal. Master's in Applied Biblical Studies from Moody. And you got a bachelor's in philosophy at the University of Southern California. And here's one: you got a lot of these things. You got a CTS certification. So I think I know what that is, but tell us, what is a CTS certification?
So the CTS is the Certified Technology Specialist, I believe it stands for, through AVIXA, which is officially the certifying body for the professional AV industry. They run, most people run Infocom. So they run the Infocom show and do the trainings, and pretty much more popular within the corporate AV world, right, as opposed to the live and church worlds, but it is taking its step over there. So I always think it's good to be able to get those certifications, and I always call myself a certification hoard, because if you look at my office, it's just filled with, if you can print out a certificate, give it to me, I'll throw it on the wall.
I was unaware that there was certifications for the AV arena. So I guess, Phil, you had been exposed to it.
I saw it somewhere. I remember seeing it somewhere, and I just, I get exposed to a lot of things, but I don't always follow up with them. But I remember seeing that somewhere, the CTS certification. So, well, good for you. And most importantly, you've got a wife, Amy, and you've got, 3 kids? How old are your kids?
From 22 to 17. So we are on the countdown. We're a semester away from freedom. I mean,
Steve can relate to that, right, Steve?
I can. My last just graduated college, so they're off the payroll and everything. So yes, it's a freeing experience.
Mine's 20, so he's still not out the door, but he's talking about it. All right. So anyhow, so you're in Lake Forest, California. All right. So you've got this book, Producing Worship, A Theology of Church Technical Arts. There's some really interesting titles here, but I'd like to ask you before you jump into them here, How in the world did you get interested in AV stuff and technology?
Yeah, well, first, let me just say thank you all for having me on. This is quite an honor to be able to come on and share this with you. But yeah, I mean, if you read through my credentials, obviously I have a degree in philosophy. And what do you do with a philosophy degree? You go in the entertainment industry, right? Because what else are you going to do with it? And so, yeah, I actually got my start back in high school doing mixing, working in various, basically being a gopher in recording studios and doing some just live roadieing, and did that throughout college. And you mentioned sports, so even I worked for the Clippers when they were playing at the sports arena, because while I was at USC, so I did some of the work for them there, and I just really stuck with it. And my interest went always toward, I would say, the theological side, which happened to be where I got my degrees, but have always worked in some type of producing within the entertainment industry. And I always think that everybody who works when I was asked, what do you do? It's like, well, you do whatever the next contract is. That's what you do. Whatever they will hire you for. And that was really when I came into the church world then in 2011 now. Has it really been that long? I noticed that I came in order to work as a technical director at a church down in Orange County. This is before going to Saddleback. And I just recognized that a lot of my volunteers would come to me after service and say, will you explain what he's saying, on the sermon? I'm like, dude, I just move a fader. Why are you asking me what the pastor is saying, but then at that moment, it dawned on me, we as ministry leaders have a specific role, don't we? I mean, we're not just moving camera angles. We're actually having an impact on exactly what's being done and the way the pastor's message is being given to the congregation. Mm-hmm. And that's where I then thought, well, I want to go to get my master's, because I have volunteers who are asking me theological questions. And that's where I ended up going to Moody, getting my master's in applied biblical studies there, and just knew I wanted to go on. And hence I ended up with the PhD in theology, and really wrote the very first Theology of Technical Arts, because what does the Bible really say? And that's one thing I always notice. People always, when you talk to tech people, they'll always be like, "Oh, the Bible says so much about stewardship," or it says so much about serving others. It's like, but you never actually hear people say, "Okay, what does it actually say about that? What does it actually say?" And so that's what I wanted to sit down and do, is go, okay, well, does the Bible really say that, or do we just keep saying that? Mm-hmm. And so that's what this book ended up being.
Yeah, cool. Good. There's a comment here, I think it's in your book, by Greg Baker, who's the tech director at Saddleback. And he says, technology has always been used since the time of Jesus. And obviously, I assume you agree with that. Can you expound a little bit more on that? I know, again, you've got chapters in the book that probably do that.
Yep. Oh, absolutely. And that's what I think when we look at biblically what technology is, right? We obviously know that, that Jesus didn't do a Facebook Live, right?
But would he?
I know. Wouldn't that be kind of cool, though? Gosh.
What would Jesus do?
Yeah. But then the question is, did he really? Because he did. I mean, those who have actually, gone to anywhere in Israel, or been into a Roman Colosseum, or been on one of the hillsides, they are actually acoustically made in order to, be able to present, the message to a large number of people at one time. So obviously Jesus as God would understand these things, and so being, you would hope, right? And so that, when we talk about technology, we have to look at it differently. Right, the Greek word that we use, techne, that it comes from, actually has a sense of knowledge and wisdom with it. It has a sense of rhetoric in the Greek, that it's more about selling an idea than it is actually picking up an object. And so so the technology he would have used would have been either the natural areas in, or using examples from real life and the situations he was placed in. And that's how, using those, he's able to connect with the people with whom he's talking. And we do that today. Just the way we do that happens to be through microphones, live streaming, and our Facebook Lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. So what do you think? I mean, pastors. It seems like we want, a lot of pastors out there want to stay 20 years behind or so in the safe technology from 20 years ago, or the. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think you said it, that it's safe, right? I mean, I actually have a section in my book where I quote a pastor who basically says that, who did an interview, and he had said, well, when you come to our church, you're going to see that it's the same now as it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 30 years ago, as the same as it was 30 years before that. And let's be honest, it sounds cool, right? It sounds authentic because we all want authentic worship. But maybe there is a sense of a false sense of, historical nostalgia that comes with that.
It's kind of like, it's like, hey, we use the King James Version. It was good enough for Peter. It's good enough for us.
Exactly.
Sorry.
Exactly.
I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
But you just nailed it, right? As I think there's a nostalgia that goes with it, and also a fear of doing it poorly, right? And let's be honest, when technology came into, the church, let's say a little over a decade ago, and we kind of made that step, most of the church world were not trained AV people. They're volunteers brought in, right? Trying to do what people who actually studied this and do it for a living do. So, it is very different now. And I think the quality is, there are a lot of, the secular world looking at us now, which is a very big change in a dynamic, but it wasn't the case. So I think when things are done poorly, that also adds a fear. And it's more the fear of it being done poorly, looking strange, having it go wrong. I mean, we always seem, and I think you hear a lot of people, making fun of pastors with, whether or not, when they aren't technologically, savvy. But you know what? Their job isn't to understand how a microphone works. Their job is to understand how the Bible works, And so our role then as technical people and in the ministry is how can we become a tool in their toolbox so that they can focus on their job and we do ours well, which can only then improve theirs. And then I think you will get people who aren't afraid to use technology.
Right. And that fear can be somewhat founded. I mean, I know it works really well when it's working really well, right? But then if something happens, it becomes a little bit of a disaster where the message is no longer, the centerpiece. It's that feedback through that microphone loop that, has the whole congregation turning around and looking at the sound guy. So,
Yep.
I mean, so the stakes are kind of a little higher today than they were in the past with things that could go wrong as well, right?
Absolutely. Don't you think there's also a sense of a false sense of expectation too, right? The same people who will be at homes that will be okay spending 10 minutes trying to get the Apple TV connected won't have the same patience if their laptop doesn't connect when they walk into, an auditorium. And really at home, you're only taking an HDMI out of the Apple TV and plugging it into, the HDMI of the TV. Here we have, pretty massive systems. And yet, so there's a certain expectation that I don't think is fairly grounded that is now put on tech people. And I think obviously there's some grace that needed, but I also think too, as tech people, if we manage that and we manage the people skills better, and be able to come to the understanding that people are frustrated and they can get frustrated. Now maybe we can take a little more back and a little more charge of, putting them at ease, which will let some of that go away.
It's interesting you mentioned people skills. I have found over the years that just working in ministry that sometimes some of the tech people behind the scenes aren't exactly the best. They don't have the best people skills. And I guess, and I'm not trying to, that's not always the case with everybody, but I've seen that a lot. Do you think it's just because of the way the brain's wired or something, and they're more nerdy, and I mean that in a positive way, and yet when it comes to dealing with people, it's like, and many people, again, like being behind the scenes, so to speak. But as Steve mentioned earlier, you're behind the scenes until something goes wrong, and then you're out in the open. I mean, have you found that to be the case?
Oh yeah.
And what do you do with that? I mean, do you, and we're kind of getting into the area now of tech, but which is what this is all about, I guess. But we've got people listening to this podcast, pastors and a lot of volunteers that do tech stuff. How can they be better? And you mentioned the people skills. So would you say, you need to learn what you're doing, you need to learn your craft, but you probably should also learn a little more about how to deal with people?
Well, and that's absolutely it. And boy, you've made a great segue into the concluding chapter of this book, by the way. So, there's a plug for that. But that is really it, right? I mean, what is the gospel? I mean, if you want to just come straight down to it, the gospel is giving the message from one person to another. It's a communication tool. What is tech? Tech is a communication tool, right? They're both have the same purpose, but the thing is, you need people on both ends of it, right? Mm-hmm. You need somebody who has the message, giving the message, somebody to receive the message. Vice versa in tech, you need someone who is inputting, whether it be the music or, the pastor's voice, and someone to output it to the congregation. And so our role is similar as long as we look at it about communication and we talk about the relationship building, right? I mean, everyone's like, if you look at the gospel, right? We always know angry sign guy that stands outside the football game, right? You're going to hell, right? That's not how you're going to sell the gospel, right? Well, why do we think then a negative attitude would work if we're sitting in a tech booth? Mm-hmm. It won't work in the other situation. So maybe the attitude and the way we think about how can we make the communication from pastor to congregant more fluid, and that has to do with us building the relationship between our church administration and our leaders. Then we all have the same goal, and that's delivery of the gospel of Christ.
Yeah, absolutely. Good stuff. Steve, I know you and I were talking a little bit about the different chapters here that Joe sent us here. You want to pull out one of these chapter titles that you find interesting?
Well, you talked a little bit about it originally, was the how did we get here, and exactly, are we, was one of the early chapters kind of, and you had mentioned that, Jesus used technology, the technology of his day. So you want to elaborate on that a little more?
Yeah, this is the thing, is we've always used technology in one way or another, right? I mean, again, it was even Aristotle who wrote a famous book, Rhetoric, which is really about technology and the using of, tools to then create an argument for your case, right? And so when you even just sit there and go, okay, one of the very first chapters, I unpack the people who had built the tabernacle, Bezalel and Aholiab, right? And we all think of, the tabernacle chapters in the Bible, right, are really the ones that stick together because you never open them, right? Once you get through most of Exodus, and you're like, all right, we'll skip over all that boring list of stuff.
Skim past numbers and
exactly.
Yeah.
But it's interesting if we actually open it up and we look at the construction narrative. The words that are used, the sheer number of times the word skill is used, the idea that Bezalel and Aholiab were teachers of the people of the craftsmen who built it, that it's a great work of art, right? It's not just that it was, a tent in the sense of we go camping and we pop up a tent. It was a great work of art. It was a great skill. Just the way you would work with gold, silver, bronze, the acacia wood, the way the linens would work together. This was a marvel that took skilled craftsmen to be able to create so that the people would then be able to just share in the glory of God. It wasn't, a miscellaneous tent of canvases with, the high priest standing there preaching, right? This was a marvel to look at. And why would that not be a metaphor for what we do with our lights and with our sound?
Okay.
Right?
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask you how, because I know those guys are builders, and architects. I was thinking, well, how do you tie the technical thing into that, which you have here in your chapter? But now that you're mentioning that, now I can see that as
it's just different materials.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's the same idea with different materials.
So the challenge, though, is going to be you want the message being presented in the best possible means, but you don't want it to be about the technology that's presenting the message. And so I would, the conflict gets out there when does it become about the flash and the dance and the pizzazz, and then that begins to take away from the message.
Yep. No, and I think that's something that has been argued ever since. I mean, if you think of the worship wars that started, 20 some years ago, even just with the music, I think that, even worship leaders had to go through this fight before we had to go through it. I mean, maybe we're going through it now, but when they talked about, the contemporary Christian music movement, and, how was that, war won? It was won because now, if you think about it, contemporary Christian music is the norm, right? Rock songs in music our church music is the norm now. The hymns aren't really the norm as far as how they used to be performed. But basically that was won by the merging of the two, by creating hymn-based rock songs, biblically sound and theologically sound lyrics that then were done to methods that are common to today's culture, right? Well, I think that's exactly what we need to do in the tech world. We're just fighting it now. And the question is, are we going to stand behind, methods, or are we going to actually stand behind, the message, right? And if I'm stuck on, I need, are you going to tell me that 36 moving lights are going to sell the gospel better than 24 moving lights? Maybe. Because it all has to do with how are you using it? Are you using it in order to focus on the gospel being presented, or are you using it just to show off how you can make a bunch of lights to move, right? Because then that is the argument, right? The argument is, well, I can share my message without any of this. Absolutely, you can. But can I highlight it? Can I use light and shade and darkness and light, all of these things to be able to focus people's attention on specific points? I mean, let's be honest. I mean, look at who does it the best. The secular film world does it the best. They can share they can make you think and feel anything based on the way they can use camera angles, lighting, and sound. Why can't we be any different?
Right.
Yeah.
As you talked about the parallel with the music industry, my thoughts were going back to Larry Norman, and kind of one of the pioneers of the, he was not widely accepted initially, and so yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah.
I'd never drawn that parallel, and then the fact that it started with the music, and now the technical arts are kind of matured enough that now it's the technical arts guys are in that same kind of position of, why does the devil have all the good lighting,
Yeah.
to borrow from a Larry Norman song.
It's kind of like that guy a few years ago that tried to put a camera on a guitar. What was his name? Steve Lacy?
I stole that from another pioneer.
Steve had this great idea to wire up a camera so you could see the frets on the guitar, and it didn't work real well the first time, and I guess that was to our demise because they didn't like it or something. The church didn't like it.
There was a church, here in town that you and I were visiting, Phil.
Yeah. Well, no, his church,
I said,
we both attended.
Yeah. No, I mean, where we got the idea.
Oh, where we got the idea, yeah.
Yeah. They were very creative and had mounted one of their portable cameras right on the neck of the guitar.
Yeah.
And it was a great little angle. So I thought, this is awesome. Didn't go over well at my church, but.
Yeah, it didn't go over too well, but it didn't work.
But isn't that it, though? Also, some of it has to do with appropriateness, right? Every church has its own identity, right? And sometimes as church tech people, we want to take our vision of what the identity should be and project it onto the church. Mm-hmm. And, maybe we need to have the conversations with the pastor first and ask what identity they want. And there is nothing wrong with it. Just turn the lights on, have a microphone, and preach. There's nothing wrong with that if that's the church's identity. Yeah. Right.
It's the culture. The culture of the church. And so, not to cut you off here, but I will. Mm-hmm. So, I guess what you're saying is if you want to have some ideas and interject some technology, you got to kind of make maybe some slow, move kind of slowly, maybe. Yeah. Give everybody a chance to kind of get a hold of it.
Well, and I think that's exactly it, right? I mean, it's about having the communication and saying, hey, this is the goal I want to get to. I mean, we can find videos online. If you meet with your senior pastor and say, this is what my vision is as a tech person. What's your vision? And maybe we can't go from A to Z on one weekend, but maybe we can use Christmas or Easter to get us to H, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then go, okay, now we're there. Let me have this date to try something fun. And now make that our new normal, right? And then kind of go from there. But then also, it's about us building the trust. I bet every pastor would love to have, Z. But do you think they yet trust you that you can do Z if all you've been doing is A? Yeah. Right? We also have to build the trust that we can pull that off as well.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So what advice would you have for other, AV techs and other churches to get exposed to the kind of the state of the art? And because if I'm at A or a B or whatever, and the pastor, the pastor's typically not leading this charge, right? They're going to be taking the the suggestions and the input from the AV, the arts director kind of guy. But if I'm I'm in a small town or whatever, and how do I stay abreast of what's going on and what might be more effective at my church?
Well, I mean, obviously the best way is anytime you can get out of your church and into somewhere else and look at it, just from their lens rather than yours. And we know that maybe there aren't big budgets to send someone to the top 3 or 4 different conferences that exist, right? If you can get it, great. But I can guarantee you, there is a mega church or a technically advanced church. There's going to be a mega church within 100 miles of you, probably, or a half a day's drive. Right there has got to be, which means they, maybe if you're a small church and you only have Sunday services, guarantee you there's a Saturday service church this large within a half day's drive of you, somewhere in the States, that you could get in a car, take your wife, and go say, hey, we're going to go look at this, and maybe it means driving home in the middle of the night. But getting that exposure and reaching out, because here's the thing, I think that, especially I see this, when I talk to people, as being at Saddleback, I always think it's funny. People think there's this big brick wall that you're not allowed to talk to us or something, or we're in some, we're at some mystical castle. But no, seriously, reach out. We'd love to be able to walk you through things and show us this is, we do things magnified because we can share the gospel bigger. Right, and to more people, not because of a certain status, right? It's just about reaching more people. And, so if you reach out to us, we'd love to be able to take you behind the scenes and even help you, everything grew at some point and everyone has their story of this is where we were and these are the steps we took, Let's help you get there. And I guarantee you, every church has somebody shoot an email, tweet them out. They would love to have you there. And that's really the best way.
Yeah, and most churches I have found are very open to doing that. So look, I'm out of time here, but I want to wrap up real quick here. And we need to have you on again, Joe, and we will. So we've been talking with Joe Way, author of the book, Producing Worship, A Theology of Church Technical Arts. What's your website that people can go to?
Okay, so it is just for the book. It's producingworship.com, and then even mine is Josiah Way, so just my legal name.com. Both will kind of take you to the same place.
Okay. josiahway.com. And what is that? JOSIAH. Right?
Yep, just like the king, biblical king, and then WAY.com.
All right,
yep.
Good deal. All right, good. Great chapters in this book. Setting the stage. How did we get here? Where exactly are we? And you mentioned the deal in Exodus, Hebrews. You talk about Jesus and the technical arts. Colossians, some the use of multimedia stuff there with psalms, hymns, spiritual songs. A lot of good stuff here. Producing worship. We need to do this again. Because we're out of time. Yeah, good deal. All right. Well, so you know how to get a hold of Joe. If you missed all that, you can always get a hold of us. You can just send us an email, support@streamingchurch.tv, support@streamingchurch.tv. That's one of our emails. We'd be glad to pass some information on to Joe Way. Or if you have some thoughts, and hey, if you think we're out to lunch here, or Joe's out to lunch, crazy, we'd love to get your feedback on that. That's okay. We'd love to hear what you have to say about it, or you want to add to some of this. Again, a great way to do that is just send us an email. So we're out of time. Thank you, Joe.
Hey, thank you.
And thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
All right. Well, this is it. I'm Phil Thompson on behalf of Joe and Steve. We're wrapping things up here. This has been Church Solutions Podcast. We hope that you have a great day. We will catch you next time. Take care.